Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine a world where the simple, innocent act of buying a candy bar for your child becomes a deadly game of Russian roulette. Imagine a society built on honor, safety, and corporate pride suddenly brought to its knees by a shadow, a faceless entity that mocked the police, terrorized the public, and vanished into the ether without ever being caught. We often look at the 1980s as a time of neon lights, economic booming, and technological optimism, especially in Japan. But in the mid-80s, a dark cloud descended over the land of the rising sun. This is not just a story about extortion. It is a story about the fragility of order. It is the story of the perfect crime. Tonight, we open the files on one of the most baffling, high-stakes, unsolved mysteries in criminal history. This is the exhaustive account of the Glico-Morinaga case and the entity known only as the monster with 21 faces. To understand the magnitude of this terror, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Japan in 1984. The country was experiencing an economic miracle. The post-war devastation was a distant memory, replaced by soaring skyscrapers, bullet trains, and a dominance in global electronics and automotive markets. It was a society that prided itself on extremely low crime rates and high social trust. Vending machines stood unguarded on street corners. Children walked to school alone. The idea of random, malicious violence against the general public was almost alien to the cultural psyche. Corporations were not just businesses. They were pillars of the community, revered institutions that provided stability and identity. Among these giants was Ezaki Glico, a confectionery company famous for its Pocky sticks and caramel candies, a brand synonymous with childhood joy. The nightmare began on the cold evening of March 18th, 1984. It was a Sunday. In the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Nishinomiya, roughly halfway between the bustling cities of Osaka and Kobe, Katsuhisa Ezaki, the president of the Glico Corporation, was winding down for the night. At 42 years old, Ezaki was a titan of industry, living in a sprawling home with his wife and young children. At approximately 9 p.m., two masked men armed with pistols and a rifle broke into the home of Ezaki's 70-year-old mother, which was located on the same property just adjacent to the main house. They bound her and stole the key to the president's residence. Moving with terrifying precision, the intruders entered the main house. They encountered Ezaki's wife, Mikiko, and their eldest daughter. The men tied them up, severing the phone lines to prevent any call for help. They then made their way to the bathroom, where Katsuhisa Ezaki was bathing with his two younger children. The sanctity of the home was shattered in an instant. Naked, dripping wet, and terrified for the safety of his children, Ezaki was dragged from the tub. The intruders forced him into clothes and dragged him out of his own home into the darkness. As they shoved him into a waiting car, they shouted obscure commands, driving off into the night and leaving a family traumatized and a nation on the brink of panic. The next morning, the kidnappers issued their demand. It was a ransom note discovered in a phone booth demanding 1 billion yen, which was roughly $4.2 million at the time, along with 100 kilograms of gold bullion. The sheer scale of the demand was audacious. It wasn't just about money. The gold bullion suggested a desire for something tangible, untraceable, and heavy. The police launched a massive manhunt, scouring the Kansai region. Helicopters buzzed overhead, and roadblocks were set up on major arteries. The media frenzy was instantaneous. The abduction of a top corporate executive was unprecedented in modern Japan. However, the kidnappers had underestimated their hostage. Katsuhisa Ezaki was not a man to accept his fate quietly. He was being held in a warehouse in Ibaraki City, near Osaka. 3 days after his abduction, on March 21st, Ezaki managed to loosen his restraints. He waited for a moment of silence, a lapse in his captor's vigilance. He pried a door open and fled into the night. He ran desperately along the railway tracks, the gravel crunching beneath his feet, his heart pounding in his chest, until he found a payphone to call for help. He was rescued, physically unharmed, but psychologically scarred. The police breathed a sigh of relief. The public celebrated. The president was safe, the ransom had not been paid, and the ordeal seemed to be over. But the nightmare was not ending. It was only the prologue. Weeks later, in April, vehicles parked outside the Glico headquarters building were torched. Then, on April 16th, a plastic container filled with hydrochloric acid and a threatening note was found inside the Glico production complex. The message was clear. The kidnappers were not done. They were angry, and they were escalating. It was in May of 1984 that the group finally gave themselves a name. Letters began arriving at major Japanese news agencies, including the Mainichi and Yomiuri newspapers. These were not hastily scrawled notes on napkins. They were typed, composed with a strange mixture of Kansai dialect, dark humor, and poetic menace. They signed them as Kaijin Nijuichi Menso, which translates to the monster with 21 faces. This name was a direct cultural reference to the villain in the popular detective novels by Edogawa Rampo, a character who was a master of disguise and a thorn in the side of the police. By adopting this persona, the criminals were turning their crime into a piece of theater. They were casting themselves as the sophisticated villains in a national drama. In one of their first letters, they openly mocked the police for their failure to catch them during the kidnapping. They wrote, "To the stupid police, are you idiots? There are so many of you, and you can't even catch one of us?" They taunted the investigators, critiquing their methods and even giving them advice on how to do their jobs better. They claimed that the kidnapping was just a lark, a way to pass the time. But now they were serious. They threatened to lace Glico's confectionery products with cyanide. The impact was catastrophic. Glico had no choice but to recall its products from shelves across Japan. Millions of boxes of candy, cookies, and chocolate were pulled and destroyed. The financial loss was staggering, estimated at around $21 million, not to mention the plummeting stock price and the erosion of consumer trust. The company was bleeding out. Production lines halted, workers were laid off. The monster with 21 faces watched it all, reveling in the chaos they had manufactured. Throughout the summer of 1984, the monster continued to send letters. They detailed their grievances, which seemed to shift between monetary greed and a strange anti-establishment philosophy. They claimed they didn't really want money, then demanded it, then mocked the company for offering it. It was psychological warfare. They were playing with the police, the media, and the public. Then, just as suddenly as the pressure on Glico reached its peak, the monster shifted focus. On June 26th, they sent a letter declaring, "We forgive Glico." They stated that the president had suffered enough and that they would stop harassing the company. The nation paused. Was it over? Had they grown bored? No, they were simply changing targets. The monster with 21 faces turned their gaze toward other giants of the food industry. Morinaga, another massive confectionery company, Marudai Ham, and House Foods. The scope of the extortion widened. The demands became more complex. It was during the extortion of Marudai Ham that the police came agonizingly close to catching a member of the group. In late June, the criminals demanded a ransom from Marudai. Following the instructions, a Marudai employee, acting as a courier under police surveillance, took a train to Kyoto to deliver the money. On the train, investigators noticed a suspicious man. He was described as having a large build, short, permed hair, and distinct eyes that were narrow and slanted, earning him the nickname the Fox-Eyed Man. This man did not look like an ordinary commuter. He was watching the courier intensely. He followed the courier as he switched trains, always keeping a distance, his demeanor radiating a quiet, predatory focus. The police were shadowing him, hearts racing, waiting for the moment the money drop would happen so they could swoop in. But the drop never happened. The Fox-Eyed Man, perhaps sensing the surveillance, or perhaps just conducting a dry run to test the police response, suddenly broke contact. He managed to slip away into the crowds of the Kyoto station, vanishing into the urban labyrinth. This failure to apprehend the Fox-Eyed Man would haunt the investigation for decades. He became the face of the invisible enemy, a phantom that the police had in their grasp and let slip through their fingers. The terror reached a fever pitch in October 1984. The monster with the 21 faces launched a direct assault on Morinaga. They sent letters to media outlets declaring that they had placed 20 packages of cyanide-laced candy on store shelves in stores ranging from Osaka to Tokyo. But they didn't just leave it to chance. They labeled the poison packages with stickers that read, "Danger, contains poison." This was a masterful stroke of psychological terror. By labeling the poison, they created a paradox. If you trust the label, you don't eat it. But what if they put poison in a package without a label? What if the label was a lie? The trust in the entire food supply chain collapsed. Supermarkets were emptied of Morinaga products. Parents were terrified to let their children eat anything they hadn't cooked themselves. The police mobilized thousands of officers to comb through convenience stores and supermarkets. And they found them. They found boxes of Morinaga Choco Balls and other treats laced with lethal doses of sodium cyanide. The stickers were real. The threat was not a bluff. The monster with 21 faces was effectively holding the entire nation hostage. They were demonstrating that they could kill anyone, anywhere, at any time, and there was nothing the police could do to stop them. In November 1984, another opportunity to catch the gang arose, this time involving House Foods. The criminals demanded 100 million yen. They gave detailed instructions for a money drop involving a station wagon on a specific stretch of the Meishin Expressway. The police prepared a trap. They deployed a station wagon loaded with a ransom, driven by an officer. As the station wagon moved toward the drop point, a white Toyota Corolla began to tail it. The police, watching from unmarked vehicles, held their breath. Then, a second vehicle appeared, observing the operation. The tension was unbearable. The drop instructions led to a rest stop where a message was found under a bench. But the criminals seemed to spook. The white Corolla sped off. A high-speed chase ensued, but the police lost the vehicle. Later, The car was found abandoned near a station. It had been stolen. Inside, they found a police radio receiver. The gang had been listening to the police communications the entire time. They knew exactly where the officers were. They were always one step ahead. The year turned to 1985. The investigation was stalling. The police had millions of data points, thousands of tips, but no solid suspects. The pressure on the police force was crushing. The media was relentless in their criticism. The monster with 21 faces continued to send mocking letters, rubbing salt in the wound. They ridiculed the police chief, calling him incompetent. This immense pressure led to a tragedy that shook the nation. Superintendent Yamamoto of the Shiga Prefecture Police, who had been in charge of the failed stakeout involving the fox-eyed man, could no longer bear the shame of his failure. In August 1985, on the day he was set to retire, Yamamoto walked into his backyard, doused himself in kerosene, and set himself on fire. His suicide was a shocking, visceral blow to the investigation and the public. It was a traditional, albeit horrific, act of taking responsibility. But the reaction from the monster with 21 faces was even more chilling. 5 days after Yamamoto's death, they sent their final letter. In this last message, they wrote, "Yamamoto of Shiga Prefecture Police died. How stupid of him. We have no friends or hiding place in Shiga. It is Yoshino or Shiketa who should have died. What have they been doing for 1 year and 5 months? Don't let bad guys like us get away with it. There are many more fools who want to copy us. Yamamoto died like a man. So we decided to give our condolences. We decided to forget about torturing food companies. If anyone blackmails any of the food companies, it's not us, but someone copying us. We are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies. It's fun to lead a bad man's life. Monster with 21 faces." And with that, they vanished. No more letters, no more poisoned candy, no more demands. The monster with 21 faces simply retired, claiming victory, leaving a trail of financial ruin, a terrified populace, and a dead police superintendent in their wake. Over the years, the statute of limitations for the crimes began to expire. The kidnapping statute ran out in 1994. The attempted murder statute for the poisoned candy ran out in nearly 2000. By the mid-2000s, the monster with 21 faces was legally untouchable. The case was officially closed, designated as unsolved. But the mystery remains. Who were they? And why did they do it? Let us delve into the theories, the whispers that have circulated in the dark corners of Japanese society for 40 years. The most prevalent theory focuses on the fox-eyed man. Police sketches and descriptions of him were plastered everywhere. Some investigators believed he was a Yakuza enforcer. The organized nature of the crime, the access to firearms, the use of police scanners, and the disciplined silence of the group all pointed toward professional criminals. Specifically, suspicion fell on the Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's largest Yakuza syndicate, or perhaps a rogue faction within it. However, the Yakuza usually operate to make money. While the stock manipulation theory suggests a profit motive, the Yakuza rarely engage in such public, theatrical terrorism that invites this level of police heat. Usually, they prefer to operate in the shadows. This brings us to the stock market manipulation theory. This is perhaps the most logical explanation for the crime. When Glico had to recall its products, its stock price crashed. When the monster announced they forgave Glico, the stock rebounded. If someone had shorted the stock before the threats and bought it back at the bottom, they would have made a fortune far exceeding the demanded ransom. The ransom demands might have just been a distraction, a way to drive the narrative and manipulate the market. The real money wasn't in the bags thrown out of trains. It was on the trading floor. Another compelling, yet controversial theory involves the B group. This theory suggests the perpetrators were members of the Burakumin community, a social minority in Japan that has historically faced severe discrimination. Some of the letters contained phrasing or cultural references that some profilers linked to this group. The theory posits that the crime was an act of socio-political rebellion against the establishment that had marginalized them. However, this theory is often criticized as being based on stereotypes and lacking hard evidence. Then there is the North Korean connection. Given the time period, the 1970s and 80s were rife with abductions of Japanese citizens by North Korean agents. Some theorize that the Glico-Morinaga case was a North Korean operation designed to destabilize the Japanese economy and sow chaos. The sophistication of the group and their ability to vanish could suggest state-sponsored training. But again, the goal seems obscure. Why target candy companies? We must also discuss the video man. In 1985, security cameras in a convenience store caught a man placing Glico chocolate on a shelf. This was during a time when the monster had threatened to put poisoned candy in stores. The man was wearing a baseball cap with a Yomiuri Giants logo. The footage was grainy, but it showed a man with a distinct jawline. Despite enhancements and public appeals, he was never identified. Was he the monster? Or just a copycat? Or perhaps an unwitting pawn paid to place a package? One specific suspect did emerge in the media: Manabu Miyazaki. Miyazaki was a writer with a known history of radical student activism and a father who was a Yakuza boss. He bore a striking physical resemblance to the sketch of the fox-eyed man. He had the anti-establishment intellect to write the letters. He was brought in for questioning. The police grilled him, but his alibi held up. He had documented proof of his whereabouts during the key crimes. He was released and later wrote a book about the experience, denying his involvement but offering insights into the criminal mindset. There was also the tape recording. The group often used recorded messages over the phone to give instructions. Analysis of these tapes revealed the voices of a woman and a young child. The child's voice was used to give directions for money drops. This suggests the group was a family unit, or at least a group with close familial ties. It chills the blood to think of a child being used in such a high-stakes felony. That child would be in their 40s or 50s today. Do they know what they were part of? Do they remember reading those lines into a microphone? Forensic science at the time was limited. There was no DNA profiling as we know it today. If the crimes happened now, the saliva on the stamps, the sweat on the letters, the hair in the abandoned cars would likely identify the perpetrators in days. But in 1984, the police relied on fingerprints and typewriters. They analyzed the typewriter used for the letters and identified it as a specific model of panwriter. But they could never trace the specific machine to a buyer. It was a needle in a haystack of millions of typewriters. The legacy of the Glico-Morinaga case is profound. It changed the way food is packaged forever. Before this case, Many food containers were not tamper-evident. If you buy a bottle of juice or a box of cookies today, and you have to break a plastic seal or pop a safety button, you are looking at the direct result of the monster with 21 faces. They forced the industry to secure the food supply. In a twisted way, their terrorism made the world safer for consumers, but at a terrible cost of innocence. The case also left a deep psychological scar on Japan. It shattered the illusion of the safe, homogeneous society. It showed that malice could strike randomly. It exposed the limitations of the police force, leading to a restructuring of how inter-prefecture investigations were handled. The failure to catch the monster remains a sore point for the National Police Agency to this day. As we look back at the events of 1984 and 85, we are left with a haunting void. The monster with 21 faces claimed they were bad guys who had more to do. Did they? Did they commit other crimes under different guises? Did they retire to a tropical island with their stock market winnings? Or did they simply blend back into the salaryman crowds of Osaka, taking their secret to the grave? The fox-eyed man might be an old man now, walking the streets of Kyoto, perhaps watching the news, smiling to himself as he remembers the days when he held the country in the palm of his hand. The child on the tape recording is out there, perhaps unaware that their voice is a key piece of evidence in the greatest unsolved mystery in Japanese history. The monster with 21 faces was never caught. They won. They committed the perfect crime, humiliated the authorities, and walked away into the darkness, leaving only a legacy of fear and a few tamper-proof seals on our candy bars. This has been a deep dive by DCF Investigations. We have walked through the timeline, the terror, and the theories. But the final answer remains out of reach. Now, I want to hear from you. In the age of modern surveillance and digital footprints, do you think a group like the monster with 21 faces could exist today? Or was this a crime that could only happen in the analog shadows of the 1980s? And who do you think they really were? Common criminals, corporate saboteurs, or something much darker? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Stay curious, stay observant, and until next time, remember that sometimes the monsters are real, and they don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they write letters to the newspaper,